I'm a Christian, been a Christian for about 20 years, but I think that most people who are Christians shouldn't be Christians. What do I mean by that? First, why am I a Christian? Well, I was an atheist for decades. I deconstructed as a teenager, analyzed my faith, tested myself, like the Apostle Paul says, and found my faith lacking, my reasons for faith lacking. Later in life, I found a good reason to believe. I got scared. I prayed to God to make me believe that Jesus was resurrected. I got that from Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. 20 years ago, I was one way. I didn't believe that he was resurrected. I didn't believe anybody had ever been resurrected. I found in my mind something that made sense. And then I believed. And suddenly I was different. I was different. I didn't decide to believe. I believed 20 years ago. And since then, I have found more and more reasons to believe in Jesus. Now, did this come from preaching? The more I learned, the more I believed, the more it made sense? The Bible's confusing. It's confusing. It is. Preachers preach contradictions. It's not hard to find things in the Bible that just don't preach, as they say. I can't make sense of the Old Testament. I'm not about to, start killing every homosexual that I see because it's in the Old Testament. If my daughter smarts off to me, and she did as a child, as a teenager, I didn't kill her. I didn't have her stoned. Point being, when the atheists say that the Bible's full of contradictions, I'm kind of with them. By the way, shout out to the atheist on YouTube who study, who are well versed in Christianity, the Bible, unbelief, this deconstruction, people who have deconstructed. Shout out, no doubt. Nonetheless, that's why I believe. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to look at Romans 10:9 and you can be saved too. Probably, I believe that if you have faith that Jesus was raised from the dead, you'll be saved. I believe that. But how everybody gets about that, gets to that point, maybe the same as me, maybe not the same as me. Try the same thing as me. That's why I didn't tell how I came to that point, because it's different. I imagine when I say I'm saved, that means I'm saved. That doesn't mean my neighbor, if he does the same thing, can be saved. Doesn't mean he can be saved at all. He may never believe. What do I think about hell? I don't know. I know who it says is going to suffer eternally, being tormented eternally. But my neighbor doesn't fall into that category, even if he isn't a believer. So, and I know that you're hearing that, and you're thinking, this guy may not be a Christian. Well, if Romans 10:9 has anything to say about it, yes, I am. I know that you want to add things to that. Well, you gotta believe what I believe about hell. You gotta believe what I believe about homosexuals and transgenders, and you gotta do that to be a Christian. I'm saying Romans 10:9 says what it says. Revelation says if you want to add to that, you better not add to it. Anyway, why do I think that most Christians should not be Christians? Again, shout out to the deconstructionist, because the Bible says, the Apostle Paul said, to do that, basically, deconstruct your faith, test yourself to be sure you're in the faith. And the reason I think most people shouldn't be Christians is because when they test themselves, they're not in the faith. Do I blame them on their faith? Am I saying that Well, if they fall away, they were never believers in the first place. They kind of were. They were kind of wholehearted. They were kind of people who analyzed their faith. Did it because they wanted to understand more? Did it because they saw cracks forming? They did it because the Apostle, whether they knew it or not, they did it because the Apostle Paul says, do it. Don't be a Christian if you don't really believe. Don't dedicate your life to a faith that you don't have. Don't do that. It's better to not believe and know that you're not a believer. You might come to faith in the future. But if you are not a believer, but you think you are, you're pretty sure, and really you're not going to find out that you really don't believe, because the church tells you not to deconstruct, tells you not to do that, tells you not to listen to atheists. So you're not probably going to listen to atheists. You think you're a believer. You've been told you're a believer. You've accepted Jesus into your heart, which doesn't really mean anything, does it? But you have, and as a result, you don't think you need to believe that he was resurrected. That's a dangerous spot to be in. You are not a believer, but you think you are. It's better to not be a believer and know you're not. As Jesus says, it's better to be hot or cold, because he will spew the lukewarm out of his mouth. You see what I mean? That's why I'm a Christian, but I believe that most Christians shouldn't really be.